So Spotify article came out saying that Spotify wants to improve podcast discovery with Podz acquisition, and I dug into what Podz is a little bit, and it excuse me, it looks like it is a widget that generates short 60-second clips that highlight the best moments of each podcast that it recommends to its user. So it kind of extracts a bite-sized clip out of long-form podcasts and then feeds it to you. That's some really cool stuff. And I'm not sure how long before it's supposed to be implemented, but what are your thoughts on that? How does that kind of inform the direction of a platform like Spotify? Because it also says that Facebook, Apple, and Amazon are also trying to jump on the podcast trend as well. So should every artist be making a podcast? Should we all be trying to get distributed on these platforms with our podcasts? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I have seen a lot of entertainers come out with podcasts. It's if you're gonna do it, you got to stick with it. Just keep that in mind. So you got to have like a content strategy around it.
Gotta have something to say, huh?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So a lot of them. I mean, it's just as long as you get people to listen. A lot of stuff is just chit chatting. Yeah. This is just personal for me. I don't listen to much chit chat.
Likewise.
So I'm more of a information sort of podcast person. Like just people shooting the breeze or talking about something is.
Can't do it.
Yes, it's not for me, but I know that there's a lot of people out there that do just listen to people shoot the breeze and talk about nothing. No offense.
Sound like you're taking shots.
No offense to you.
About nothing.
No offense if you like to listen to that. But I'd say Spotify did this because they're trying to go. You've seen the moves they've made. They're trying to go very heavily into podcasts. So They had the exclusive deal with Rogan. I think I don't know if it was an exclusive deal. Was it exclusive with Joe Budden podcast?
Yes.
Deal? Yeah, they had an exclusive deal with Joe Budden because they see that talk radio. They're trying to replace radio. They're moving talk radio over on to Spotify, and then they're trying to come up with these different solutions to be able to advertise effectively to podcasts because their Spotify audio ads are not that great. As we've talked about before, like you really have to know what you're doing in order to get those to work for you. So they're not as appealing. I won't say they're not that great. They're not as appealing as Facebook ads or Instagram ads or YouTube ads because those are a little easier to grasp for new people. Whereas the podcast one is like you got to really specialize in it. And even if you specialize in it, it's probably still not the first one you're going to do.
100%.
Unless you're just a pure podcaster.
Right.
And you're just trying to get more subscribers to your podcast so that you can monetize the listeners on your podcast.
Right.
That's one strategy that people use. So if you want to add that into your brand as a music artist, by all means, you can add that strategy I just said.
Yeah.
Where you have your podcast and you're just trying to grow that podcast as a part of your brand. And then you bring on more listeners and you monetize that audience.
Right.
Because podcast listeners do typically they earn more. I think that probably has to do with just that they're consuming more information and they're bettering themselves in that way. So it's just usually it's a different type of listener. That's my guess on it, but it's a fact that podcast listeners usually they earn more because I guess they're just digesting that information. And they're also very loyal to the shows that they listen to. So once you get the podcast listener, let's say you did start one, let's say you're passionate about a certain subject that ties in with your music brand. You can start a podcast around that.
Yeah.
Joe Budden started a podcast even though he was an artist.
Yeah.
And that he just discovered that he kind of liked that more than doing the music itself. And that took off for him.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my grasp on that podcast market. You have other people trying to enter it because they see that it's taking away the market share from the talk radio.
Yeah.
I don't know if I mentioned on here before, but like the Dave Ramsey show, definitely, I think this past year, I think that's the third biggest talk show in America. It might be the world. I'm not sure, but I think they might have just started to have podcasts surpass their talk radio listenership.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, the wave is coming.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to mention though is that most people, whenever they start a podcast, will just have one episode and then they kind of let it fizzle out.
Yeah.
Because the first time you come up with one, it might be hard to figure out the content, and you had a strategy, but the strategy didn't work. So if you stick with your podcast, it usually doesn't take off as quickly as some of the other platforms. I think they're still building in more tools into it. Like I think on Spotify, they still don't even show how many followers a podcast has. So they're still building in more tools to it. But, pay attention to what they're doing with the podcast and what the move Spotify is making. Try to see what direction they're going in so that you can have more higher margin things in your music brand. Because just getting the little penny from the streams, that cannot be your entire strategy. But you get a bigger check from a sponsor for your podcast or for your brand as a whole. That's another higher margin item, just like we mentioned with your merch and everything else. So this is an idea. Not everybody's made to do a podcast, but if that's something that you want to do, have these things in mind.
Yeah, that's good, man.